Hello, my name's Dr. Maureen O'Neill and I'm from the University of Sunshine Coast and Australian Catholic University here in Queensland, Australia. My co-authors are Dr. Bill Allen and Angela Calder, and they're also from the University of Sunshine Coast in Queensland. Today's topic is a question. It's about how do I juggle both sport and school? And it's about the demands and issues voiced by current and former Australian school athletes. So, in this particular presentation, I will be talking about the importance of how school-age athletes juggle both sport and school from the perspectives of the athletes themselves. So, talking about the importance of that, what the research entitled, and then most importantly, the implications of the findings for these school-age athletes and their support pillars. And here's a little bit of background to school-age athletes and the increasing numbers since 2009, as evidenced by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. We've had an increasing number of high-performance school-age athletes coming through the development stages. It was also evidenced as the increase of school-age athletes at the Summer Olympics in 2012, where 17 out of the 400 athletes that were competing were all aged between 16 and 18 years old. As you can see here in chart 1, as I've mentioned, since 2009 we've got an increasing number of school-age athletes, particularly from the under 16 years, that would be in year 10, the 16 to 18 year olds that actually are in senior years of 11 and 12, and some of the over 18s are also still at school and trying to do sport and training at the same time. And as you can see, we have 3 levels of competitiveness for our high-performance school-age athletes to come through. At the top level, we have the international competitors, and they are studying and both competing at the same time and competing in the international arena. We also have the age level, which is very competitive, but mostly at national competition levels. And then finally we have our developmental programs throughout many sports in Australia, and they come up through the National Talent Identification programs. When we look at the empirical literature, Radke and Coulter in particular talk about the problems that athletes face in time and allocation management. Handling the demands of school and training is also outlined by Radke and Coulter in a Swedish report, where they looked into perhaps flexible options for those that are trying to combine school and training. Some of the evidence that's come out of Australia is certainly the misbehaviour of when they're quite young and then having to mix with the adult environment because they are so talented and are up with adults. Certainly from Angela Calder herself, fatigue and recovery is quite important for the athletes, and inequities was dealt in a report done in Australia in reference to the opportunity to be able to break through and have equitable situations so that no matter your economic socio status, you are able to break into and afford fees, etc., for various levels of sport. But as you can see, and quite dominantly from all of these authors, it's all about the problem-based rather than the athlete's own perspective of what they feel balancing sport and education is about. So this justifies. So the method and methodology then of this study, of the big research, was that we designed it so that it was cross-sectional design, where we data collected from 39 interviews, which was 19 athletes, 10 parents and 10 teachers. However, the meta-analysis study that I'm looking at in this topic, just to get the voice of the athletes about balancing and juggling sport and education, is from 19 athletes. And these 19 athletes were aged 15, 16 to 17 and over 18. So in the 15s and 16-year-olds, definitely still at school, and they got the here and now perspective, and the over 18s are the former school-age athletes, they have the ability of hindsight and reflective perspective, looking back once they've been through it to see what's going on. So as you can see, in this 19 athletes, we had an array of sports, Olympic sports from kayaking through to gymnastics. The highest amount of interviews came from swimming, obviously, and surf life saving, which is quite a dominant sport here. But we did have a good selection of sports. As you can see, just if I break it down to female athletes, which out of the 19 there was 12, you can see that the representation in team and individual sport, more in individual sport, and the school types that they came from varied from specialist schools, non-government schools, and government schools. And as you can see the breakdown there between current, those that are still at school, and the female athletes that had left, the former ones. So what were some of the findings then in this analysis where we asked the 19, what were your demands and issues that you faced? And this is what they spoke about. Collectively, the common issues that all current and former athletes spoke about were tiredness and nutritional awareness, so relating to their physical issues. When they were talking about tiredness, they were constantly repeating, "I'm always tired and sore." And this points to part thereof of the literature where it does talk about physical fatigue. It also talked about nutritional awareness, and many of the current and former are quite good at knowing that to balance for their recovery they need a very balanced nutritional diet. Another issue that all current and former athletes, as you can see here, the comments that were made were equally the same amount between what they do in their off time, which is procrastinating, and the social sacrifices that they have to give up. When they were mentioning procrastination, it was about that they weren't taking up time, they weren't taking or using it effectively. The literature talks about they need to time manage, but the athletes were talking about, yes, we know we have to manage, but when we have our down times, we just want to do nothing, which is really wasting time. Another interesting area that was really commented on both by current and former was about the sacrifices they give up to do this intense training schedule and to balance between time for school, time for intense training. Where do the friends? These become sacrifices. They lose contact with their friends, or they don't get to go out with them. And most of them did make comments about that they just felt that they didn't have that opportunity to be doing what other kids their age were doing. If we break it down between what the current athletes were talking about, so those still at school, to those that had left school and had that reflective perspective, there was two distinct issues that both of them talked about separately. The current athletes still at school talked about mindset, about all having the same common friends and like-mindedness about the sport, the interests that they shared. So a lot of them, the younger athletes, spoke about only having friends within the intense training groups that they were actually training with, because that's where they spent the majority of their time. They all were focused, they were all centred on the one purpose, and they didn't have to explain themselves. Whereas the former athletes, because they could look back and have the time to reflect, all talked about the financial difficulties that were faced by their support people, such as their parents, trying to make the fees, paying the fees, trying to be on the road and travelling. The enormous cost and financial difficulties that was all about. And they could only think about that when they had the ability to be able to think what was some of the difficulties at the time and think back, because really it was their parents dealing with it. But now, as they're older and they've been through it, they reflect back and think, yes, that was a bit of a difficulty. An outstanding find that came from one of the studies that has been written up by myself, Allen and Calder in 2013, was this specific finding that we found that all the females in the group, and there was 12, all talked about. And it was all about marginalisation. It was about how they got teased or name-called or really bullied. And they had certain comments to make. An adult female said she had bad and it created problems for her at school all the time about being a high-performance athlete. So they got teased about being a high-performance athlete. See here, she went further on to say, I got bullied from other students at my school as they were jealous that I achieved excellence in school, sport and education, which other students in my school could never do. So there was jealousy about her having these excellent talents in her field, and the other students felt perhaps a little bit jealous of the talents that she had. And then one of the younger athletes, who was quite a talented athlete, who had come back from a very high competition, said she got constantly teased and taunted about some of the achievements that she had done by her school friends when she got back to school. These are some of the bullying issues that the female athletes were all talking about, and broken down by the types of schools that they actually attended throughout Australia. So the majority, as you can see, came from non-government of the comments that were made of females who were bullied and talked about it. So the majority of comments of the teasing and bullying were from other students to high-performance athletes, particularly the females talked about it in non-government schools. But bullying, as you can see, was frequently quoted and commented about in government, non-government, in-school sports programs such as Excellent Sports and Specific Pathways. Again, if we looked at what types of reports they were, and this was reported in our article O'Neill, Allen and Calder in 2013, and they were all centred on being marginalised, name-called or mean behaviours. So what does this seem to lead to? Well, the athletes specifically identified their physical problems, and they did that quite collectively, both current and former. They all said they were tired and sore. So what's the elephant in the room? Everybody knows that about it, and the athletes themselves are saying it, but someone has to do something about it. So we need to talk more to them specifically about their recovery and their need for nutritional awareness to overcome that physical fatigue. They also talked about procrastinating. In other words, in their own terms, they were wasting time. What do we need to talk more specifically about? We need to talk in their language and tell them, don't waste time. We don't need to say overall, go time manage, because they don't seem to understand that how to time manage, but we need to tell them more specifically, don't waste your time when you've got time to do it. They also talked about certain issues of individually of mindset, which was the current, and the former talked about inequities or financial difficulties. The current ones talked about having like-minded people surround them, and that is a good strategy. And secondly, the former athletes talked about the financial burdens, and one strategy is perhaps more advice given from the sporting bodies about financial directions that parents can take to fund fees, etc. So going further into the implications of the findings then is, how do we overcome and give them a strategy to juggle or balance through that sport and education, knowing the identified issues that both current and former athletes have mentioned in this study? Well, the main thing is to maintain resilience. The athletes need to, as Call in 2008 says, have a loving support system and make plans, follow through with them, communicate and problem solve, and give them the skills to do that. That's really important. But most importantly, have a positive outlook and have the capability to manage their own feelings and impulses. And to be able to, as Andrew Fuller in 1998 suggests, that they need to have that ability to be able to bungee jump through some of the pitfalls, because many of the strategies suggest that resilience is all about, when you get down into a very sad place, how to bring yourself up, or to confront difficulties that the athletes will. Sometimes things just don't work out for them. They may miss things at school that they needed to be at. They may miss things at the sport level. They may not always get the gold medal. How do we pull them up from those parts of life? Well, we just need to give them strategies, the mindset, the ability to be able to bring themselves back up again. So for athletes, this means let's give them tips on how to succeed their well-being. Let's make them have realistic expectations, happy balance, give them connectiveness back to the classroom when they're travelling. For example, let them be able to come in perhaps with Skype, or perhaps even have what we have here in Australia, not only the Facebook but the closed version of Schoolology, where each school forms a group with the classroom, and only the classroom mates plus the travelling athlete can come in and update themselves as to what's going on or happening in the classroom. But most importantly, always have positive self-talk to them. Take action when necessary. When you hear a child start saying, "I'm tired and sore," don't think somebody else is going to deal with that. Be proactive. If they're constantly always tired, it may be a lack in their diet. They may need a better nutritional balance. So take them to a nutritional expert. And most importantly, let's manage stress, as Stallman et al. Says in 2009. So another way that we can look at it too, and is happening in certain countries, is about the 9 pillars of character that we can give them, and these are their values. So we can talk about self-reliance and responsibility, honesty, giving students that are both at school and combining with sport these very important pillars of strength of being respectful, self-confident, leadership, tolerant, humble. And this is what we call character of education for school-age athletes. And particularly this example is happening currently in Malaysian schools, and it involves aspects of their knowledge, feeling and action. And in conclusion, what are some of the strategies? Well, it's to balance between sport and education. They need to have strength and reliability of character, and particularly from their pillars of strength, which are both their parents and their teachers. And these resilient strategies provide opportunity to have life skill tips and the ability to be able to, as these renowned authors quoted here, such as Fuller, Fredrickson, O'Neill et al., Stallman et al., all say, to be able to give them the bounce back opportunity to even go beyond and to cope with all the challenges that when they're trying to juggle between sport and school, as the athletes identified in this study, occur. Thank you so much for listening to me.